So I got arrested last Monday. It's actually out of character for me. I'm the kind of person who presses the button and waits for it to change to walk, even if there are no cars coming. More than that, I've actually never seen myself as the activist type. I have colleagues and friends for whom their passion for social justice is and always has been a key part of their identity and or their ministry. But for me, it just sort of, it just sort of happens. I have this deep compassion and love for people and for the world, and because I care, I pay attention to what people who are suffering are saying, and when their words move me, I can't help but act. It's not comfortable, though, and it's not natural. It's definitely not my first inclination to hit the streets and start rabble-rousing, although it turns out that once I do, it's kind of fun. When I think about the civil rights movement with a gift of hindsight, it's clear as day that had I been alive and serving a church in those turbulent times, it would have been right and necessary to participate. And then I think about the future and about my children, and God willing, if they ever figure out the relationship thing, grandchildren. And I know that I need to be able to say to them that I did everything in my power to help create a world with justice, equity, and compassion for all. And so I went to Olympia and I got arrested, and I made my small, very small contribution to this movement that's building on the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and attempting to create fusion across all the artificial lines that the powers that be use to try to divide us and keep us apart from one another. Now, I know, how many of you have heard about the Poor People's Campaign? Okay, so some but not all. And maybe how many of you, of those who've heard of it, how many of you know it primarily because of its historical context, because the Poor People's Campaign is what Martin Luther King was planning when he was assassinated, right? So now there's this new Poor People's Campaign. It's led by William Barber, who was the author of our first reading. And what it is a national call for moral revival. It seeks to unite people, to challenge the evils of systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the nation's distorted morality. What I experienced in Olympia was different than anything I've been a part of before. Rather than centering the voices of politicians or other skilled speakers with sophisticated intellectual analyses of the issues, people who had something to teach from the head, we heard from people whose lives were directly impacted, people who had stories to tell from the heart. Our focus on Monday was environmental degradation and lack of access to health care. And so we heard the story of a woman whose father had died of cancer at the age of 32 because he'd been exposed to toxic waste at his workplace. We heard from a man whose son died by suicide less than a week after being discharged from the hospital because his insurance benefits had ended, even though the staff of the hospital knew very well that he was at risk. And it went on, one story after another after another. The speakers weren't all polished necessarily, but they were all powerful. Every single one brought tears to my eyes. To be honest, though, what impressed me even more was the way people treated one another on the campaign. On the one hand, everyone was very kind and respectful. But it went, beyond simple politeness. There was this expectation of skill in communicating across difference. For example, when we introduced ourselves at the beginning of the day, we were asked to share our pronouns. And this is where the other piece came in, this sort of firm but gentle accountability. So we're asked to share our pronouns. Someone pushed back on that. Why do we have to do that? It's clear I'm a man. And of course it was a white man, but why do we have to do that? It's clear I'm a man. And the leader of the training, an African-American man named Jonathan, explained that he too had had some resistance at first around this practice, but that what he had done was listen to his trans siblings who said that, when it becomes a normal expectation that everyone identify in this way, that makes the space safe for them to be who they are. And he said, that's why we do this. And if you're uncomfortable, you're welcome to go. So, it was this powerful but gentle and kind accountability. He took that opportunity and educated everyone there. This is just what we do. And we do it because we've been asked by people who deserve to be seen and respected, people who deserve to feel safe. So those two practices, the deep respect and that sort of gentle but firm accountability, made it possible for a really, truly diverse group of people to work together toward shared goals. There were 16 of us who were arrested. A number of us were clergy from all different traditions, from Catholic to Protestant to, there was a rabbi. There were a couple of Republicans. There were some homeless people who got arrested. And then, of course, there were those of us who had more privilege. It was a really diverse group of folks working together on common goals. Now, taken as a whole, these strategies employed by the Poor People's Campaign serve to counteract the three habits of thought that we're looking at together today: denial, dehumanization, and dismissiveness. Now, denial, of course, is the refusal to see what is real and true, but unpleasant or not aligned with our worldview. Dehumanization is the practice of categorizing people and thinking of them and sometimes treating them as things as opposed to sacred beings with inherent worth and dignity. And dismissiveness is that thing we do when we give ourselves permission to disregard people, their experiences, or their stories because of the way they present themselves, right? So all three Ds are present in all of us. They're a remnant of our biological history as tribal omnivores, emphasis on tribal. They're practices that allow us to prioritize people we know and love and recognize, people like us, PLUs, over people who we don't know and love and recognize, or at least not yet. I see these habits within myself, and I see them on both sides of the political aisle. I believe they're three of the reason that divide just keeps getting wider, and that wide divide, that's what's preventing we, the people, from being able to exert influence on our elected officials to do what's right, as opposed to what is politically expedient. So let's break them down a little bit, starting with denial. When we talk about denial or deniers, there's a specific issue that immediately comes to mind for many of us, right? Climate change, yeah. So climate change deniers are denounced as ignorant and anti-science and backwards, sticking their head in the sand. But here's the thing. Studies have actually shown, and we love science, studies have actually shown that liberals and conservatives are equally vulnerable to denial and confirmation bias, which is to say, we give less credence to data that challenges our opinions and more to that which confirms it. There's no such thing as pure reason. That's just not the way our brains work. As Jonathan Haidt puts it in his book, The Righteous Mind, each individual reasoner is really good at one thing and one thing only: finding evidence to support the position he or she already holds, usually for intuitive reasons. We should not expect individuals to produce good, open-minded, truth-seeking reasoning, particularly when self-interest or reputational concerns are at play. But if you put individuals together in the right way, such that some individuals can use their reasoning powers to disconfirm the claims of others, and all individuals feel some common bond or shared fate that allows them to interact civilly, you can create a group that ends up producing good reasoning as an emergent property of the social system. Now, the nature of denial is that we can't see our own blind spots, which means we need one another. And by that I mean we need people who have different perspectives, opinions, and experiences. And that temptation that we all have to gravitate toward like-minded people, right? We like being surrounded by like-minded people. It's a big part of what got us into this mess. If we can't learn to connect and learn and listen across difference, we're never going to get out of this mess. Which leads us to dehumanization. Now, when President Trump referred to immigrants as animals, He dehumanized them, and people were justifiably outraged. Of course, he had to do that because he and Jeff Sessions have initiated a policy that segregates babies and children, separates babies and children from their parents while their immigration status is determined. We can't do things like that unless we're able to see human beings as less than, as things and not sacred beings. But he's not the only one who does this. Do you remember Hillary Clinton and her basket of deplorables? Okay, that's dehumanization too. Liberal circles are rife with this bad thought habit. People make sweeping generalizations about Trump voters, conservatives, evangelical Christians, you name it. I know you've seen it too, right? So here are my questions. Can we live with compassion? Can we hold that understanding that all people are products of their upbringing and experiences? Can we remember that everyone has a story and that each and every one of us has something to learn from each and every single one of those stories? And can we see all people, as sacred beings with inherent worth and dignity? Rather than arguing, we need to listen first, ask questions, and not the hostile questions, because we're good at that part too. Like, how on earth could you think that? But genuinely curious questions. We can seek to understand more than to be understood. And then once we've listened, we can find those points of agreement, those shared values. We can build or create or locate that common ground. And from there, we can build a relationship. We ask, once we've listened, once we understand, once we've established common ground, established relationship, we can ask, I see some things a little differently. May I share my perspective? We can choose to see ourselves as members of the same community rather than members of opposing teams. And I think we should. Now, don't get me wrong, we need to stand up to racism, hate, and bigotry when we see it. But as Audre Lorde puts it, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Responding to hate and bigotry and dehumanization with hate and bigotry and dehumanization makes the problem worse. Now, not everyone can do this work of reaching across those differences. Anyone who's being targeted by hate or discrimination absolutely has the right to set firm boundaries to keep themselves and their spirits safe. But those of us who have some privilege that affords us relative safety in most situations, we need to step up. And we need to enter into relationship, and not just any relationship, but that Martin Buber, I, thou, subject to subject, not subject to object kind of relationship with as many people as we can. Which leads us to dismissiveness. You know that columnist in the Daily News, I think it's Scotty something, who uses the word libtards all the time? Right? Now, not only is that offensive in that it incorporates an offensive term that's no longer used to describe people with developmental disabilities, but it also dismisses the validity of any alternative perspectives or opinions or stories, right? So there's dismissiveness. Meanwhile, I've heard liberals refer to Trump voters as uneducated, illiterate, and stupid. I've watched people mock other people for bad spelling and grammar. The articles comparing Trump's oratory to Obama's make me profoundly uncomfortable. See, white, educated, middle-class norms and ways of communicating are not inherently superior to all other ways of communicating. And the skill with which someone articulates an idea doesn't necessarily correlate with the value of the idea they're attempting to communicate. Right? No one likes to be dismissed. No one likes to be talked down to or insulted. No one likes to be treated like they're stupid. When we're dismissive, we cause harm. We make people angry, and the divide gets wider and deeper. You know, I've really come to believe that we are being played. The outrageous policies and tweets, the comments taken out of context, the constant stream of bad news and harmful memes, their purpose is to turn us against one another and distract us so that the powers that be can continue to act in ways that align with the best interest of the corporations and the lobbies rather than serving the greater good. Now, the Poor People's Campaign has really struggled to get media attention. That's why I went to go get arrested, because apparently white people getting arrested will sometimes get them coverage. I can only conclude, though, that the reason it's having such a hard time getting press is that the seeds of goodness that I saw there threaten those powers that be. It's slow going. It's heart work, not head work. It consists of building relationships, one conversation at a time. But this is the kind of work that will save us. Which is not to say I think everyone should take to the streets. But I do believe that we all need to find our own way to work on this issue. We all need to start by examining our own behavior. What are the ways in which we are in denial? The ways in which who are the people that we dehumanize? And what causes us to be dismissive? Can we replace those behaviors with respect and compassion? The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house, but love, kindness, humility, accountability, listening. These are tools we can use not only to dismantle, but to build. On that common ground created by our deep longings, our shared dreams and values, brick by brick, we can create a world with peace and justice for all, a world that's worthy of our children. This is the work that's ours to do. May we do it with patience and passion. May we dismantle structures of systemic oppression and use what we learn to build a solid foundation for the future that will support justice, equity, and peace. So be it, and so may it be.